At 11 a.m. on Tuesday, May 24, 2022, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos shot his 66-year-old grandmother, Celia Gonzalez, in the face at the home they shared in Uvalde, Texas. He took off in her 2008 black Ford F-150. 28 minutes later, County 911 receives a frantic call from a speech specialist at Robb Elementary. She states that she had just witnessed a truck plow into a concrete barrier directly behind the school. While still on the phone with 911, two men from a nearby funeral home heard the noise and approached the vehicle to see if they could help. The two men later told police that Ramos jumped out of the passenger side carrying an AR-15 and a bag full of ammunition. Ramos shot 3 times at the men, who took off running. Ramos then climbed the school's 5-foot fence and walked towards the doors of the school while firing into the windows as he walked by. School coach Yvette Silva was outside with a class of 3rd graders when she saw Ramos walking towards the school. She immediately radioed the principal to initiate a lockdown. The state of Texas had recently approved a grant for public schools to upgrade their security system because of an unrelated Texas school shooting. That said, Robb Elementary had just received new security equipment and software. The principal tried to initiate the lockdown but couldn't get a Wi-Fi signal. She chose not to announce the lockdown over the intercom, but instead asked the custodian to go make sure all the doors were locked by hand. The custodian started to do that, but after hearing gunshots, ran and hid in the cafeteria. The doors at Robb Elementary were programmed to always be locked. However, teachers would oftentimes leave the doors propped open because of the lack of keys. One teacher noticed Ramos was headed towards the door that she had propped open with a rock. She moved the rock and closed the door, but it remained unlocked. This is the door Ramos used to enter the building. As he was walking towards the school, a Uvalde school district police officer arrived on campus. He drove right past Ramos, who was hiding behind a parked car. Just as Ramos is about to enter the school, a Uvalde city police officer shows up on scene. The officer, who just happens to be the commander of the SWAT team, sees Ramos with a gun and asks permission to kill Ramos, but his supervisor doesn't respond. Weeks later, records indicate Ramos walked by multiple officers, some of which had the opportunity to shoot him before he ever even went in the school. Ramos then enters the building from the northwest entrance and walks to room 112. The teacher, Irma Garcia, was desperately trying to lock the door, but Ramos shot out the classroom window and entered. He backed Miss Garcia into the corner of her own classroom, said good night, and killed her. Heartbreakingly, Irma's husband, Joe Garcia, died of a heart attack just 2 days after the attack. Rooms 111 and 112 were joined by a door in the middle of the classroom, so Ramos could easily access both. He stood in the middle of the room, turned on what survivors called sad music, and told the children, "You're all gonna die." He then opened fire. Earlier that day, Robb Elementary was having an academic award ceremony to celebrate the students who had worked hard throughout the year. So some of the parents had been with their children just 35 minutes before the shooting started. In just 2.5 minutes, Ramos fired more than 100 rounds of ammunition in rooms 111 and 112. By 11:37, 9 officers, which entered from separate doors, were standing in front of rooms 111 and 112, including Uvalde School District Chief Pete Arredondo. Initially, officers attempted to follow Ramos into the classroom, but when Ramos fired at them, they retreated. This was a turning point in the case because active shooter training teaches police officers not to retreat, but to push forward and neutralize the attacker, regardless of the risk to their own lives. One reason Chief Arredondo took so much criticism is because not only did he fail to approach the situation as an active shooter, he wrote the department's policy on how to handle active shooters. One of the teachers, Eva Morales, who had been shot inside her classroom, called her husband, Officer Ruben Ruiz, who was standing outside of the school. Officer Ruiz tried to enter the class to help her, but was stopped by other officers. They took away his weapon and escorted him back outside. Ava later died from her injuries. Chief Arredondo told officers Ramos was contained in an office. This was another turning point because despite building blueprints showing there were no offices in either classrooms, and Eva Morales telling her husband that both rooms had children, they decided to treat this as a barricaded shooter as opposed to an active shooter. One officer pleaded with Chief Arredondo saying, quote, "Dude, we've got to get in there. We've got to get in there. He just keeps shooting. We've got to get in there," end quote. Now remember, Pete Arredondo is the chief of the school district's police force. This is his jurisdiction. He is the incident commander. Through body cam footage and interviews weeks later, many officers state they didn't want to go in the room because they were trying to prevent their own loss of life.
Like, not sound selfish, but make sure we go home at the end of the day, but at least more of these kids can go home at the end of the day. You know, understand this is a job we signed up for. Yeah, we put our life on the line. But
at 11:41, Chief Arredondo calls at dispatch, who asks if the doors are locked. He says they don't have a key, but he does have a Halligan. We later find out that the door was never locked and could have been opened at any time if someone had just turned the handle. At 12:03, a 911 call is made from a student in room 112. It's a 10-year-old little girl named Chloe Torres who tells dispatch to send help. 10 minutes later, she calls again, asking for help and wondering when the cops will arrive. Chloe tells dispatch, quote, "There is a room full of dead bodies." She also counts 8 to 9 survivors. Chloe, whose dad is a Marine, put other kids' blood on her face to make it appear as though she was dead. This information is relayed to Chief Arredondo, who tells dispatch and other officers he's waiting on a key to unlock the door. Remember, he told dispatch earlier he had the equipment he needed to open the door. Also remember, the door wasn't even locked. Everyone assumed it was, but no one ever checked. This is another pivotal moment, as this 911 call should have changed their course of action. At 12:23, body cam footage of Arredondo is heard saying, quote, "We've lost 2 kids. These walls are thin. If he starts shooting again, we're going to lose more kids. I hate to say it, we have to put those to the side right now." For the next 27 minutes, 28 officers from 4 different agencies are inside the building discussing the tactical approach. Finally, at 12:50, Border Patrol tactical agents have had enough and breached the classroom, killing Ramos. Almost immediately, law enforcement was heavily scrutinized. Body cam footage started being released, which only furthered people's feelings about the situation. At one point, police shouted into the classroom, "Is anyone in there?" A little girl yelled, "Yes, we're here, we're here." Ramos then walked over to her and shot her. Feeling like law enforcement was stalling, some parents tried getting their children out of school themselves. While trying, some parents were tased, others were tackled, some were pinned to the ground, some were handcuffed. One woman who was begging the police to help her child was told, quote, "We would help your child, but we can't. We're out here dealing with you." One mother took off running into the school. Police put her in handcuffs to calm her down, but once released, she climbed a fence, entered the school, and rescued both her children and another little boy from their respective classrooms. Despite 376 law enforcement officers arriving, it took more than 70 minutes to end this. 19 students and 2 teachers died. 4 children and 1 teacher survived. Chief Arredondo was heavily criticized for not taking greater measures to stop the shooter sooner. In August 2022, he was fired by the school board. 2 other officers were fired and 2 ultimately resigned.